Thanks, guys, for that first update for the day. And we've now got our reporter, John Kingston, with us to talk a little bit about some new regulations falling down in California that are aimed at targeting those emissions in warehousing. John, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Tell us, what have you just dropped on FreightWaves.com?
Yeah, it did just drop at about 8 o'clock. It's a story we worked on last week. It's some new regulations put forth by the South Coast Air Quality Management District, known as SCAQMD, and they govern the really the Southern California area. And they are designed to kind of put a point system in place for warehouses to meet for the generation of carbon emissions for trucks coming in and out of their facilities. Now, this is fairly controversial for two reasons. Number one, this district's responsibility is normally for stationary sources like power plants or cement plants, and here they are governing something mobile, which is a truck. So there's going to be litigation, I'm quite sure, over that they might have overreached. The second is that this is not all that easy for a warehouse to necessarily meet because they do not own, they not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, they don't own the trucks that are coming in. So if a truck comes in and it's a dirty truck, it's an old truck, and it's got a very high carbon footprint, that's going to go against the scorecard, the carbon scorecard of that warehouse, and there's not really that much they can do about it. Now, what they will tell you is that what the regulators will tell you is, well, there are some things you can do. First of all, you can put solar panels on top of your warehouse, and you can generate more power for your warehouse from the sun, and you get a lot of credits that way. That's number one. They will tell you that you can incentivize the drayage companies to bring in trucks that are fairly clean. Maybe you have a different type of set of charges for the use of the warehouse if it's a clean truck. So maybe they go out and buy an electric vehicle. So there's that. But this is not quite that easy to do. So I think this is going to be one of these ones that's going to probably end up in the courts because there's a question of jurisdiction over a mobile facility like a truck versus what the remit is of the SCAQMD. But this is another area of sustainability regulation that the trucking industry is going to have to deal with specifically in California. And to Zach's point, the Los Angeles, Ontario area is obviously very big. Ontario would be covered by this region, but by the SCAQMD jurisdiction, so they're going to be part of it too. So, just another rule out there. We're getting ready for AB5, and now we've got this. So, California is a never-ending source of news here at FreightWaves.
Do you think that a law being passed like this would unfairly target maybe small owner operators or smaller carriers who don't necessarily have the money to invest in some of those cleaner trucks and maybe like almost kind of run them out of business from being able to access these warehouses?
Well, I guess it would depend on what the warehouses do. I mean, if the warehouses start putting together charges or fees or restrictions on really dirty trucks from using their facilities, then obviously an owner operator with an old truck that serves the drayage market, yeah, they're going to get hit. The regulations on the surface don't target the driver; it targets the warehouse owner. So exactly how the driver gets hit really is up to the steps that the warehouse owner might take to encourage clean trucks coming through the gates. So there's a lot of other shoes to fall here based on how the warehouses seek to implement this and how they themselves try to get up and meet it.
So, John Kingston, one of the things that we always talk about is the amount of regulation and rules that are going on in California. And it seems like just because there's so much activity and so much volume coming through these ports in the region, that they can kind of get away with it. Do you think there's any limit to any of these regulations that will really kind of force, activity to the East Coast a little bit more?
No, I had a conversation with somebody about this, kind of about that very subject. And when you look at the total bill that they're estimating, I think they're estimating like 90 cents per square foot. A warehouse with X number of square feet is going to be charged 90 cents. It'll add to their cost like 90 cents. That is not enough to drive somebody all the way through the Panama Canal. The question is, do they then instead go into Oakland or San Francisco? But the assumption is this kind of regulation by SCAQMD will eventually spread north in the state. So no, in that sense, the California market is, or the Southern California import market is so good and has so many advantages to it that they'll put up with a lot before they go somewhere else.
So, do you think that this rule, and honestly, almost all of the legislation that's being passed when it comes to these emissions regulations, is more of an incentive getting people to buy into this clean energy, clean trucks initiative, or is it more of just a burden trying to make it more difficult to exist in the way that things are now?
No, I mean they would view it. They would view it as very much an incentive that there's going to be these not carbon credits, but these charges that you'll be able to avoid. You'll be able to earn credits if you're a good boy and you're nice and clean. I haven't seen anything in the regulation regarding the ability to sell those credits, but you'll be able to keep your own bill down. I don't think the state will tell you they don't want to bring in a whole ton of money as a result of this. They're not looking as a gigantic revenue source. It is going to be an incentive operation. But no, I don't think they're trying to shut anything down. That sector is just too important for that area to do that. So they like it to survive. There's a lot of jobs there. They would also like it to get clean. So there's an element of this that kind of similar to the low carbon fuel standard, which is an incentive to make cleaner fuels, cleaner transportation fuels out there. And it's more of a carrot stick thing. And I think they'd like to see the carrots clean things up before they have to bring down the stick. The industry will tell you that, going back to the problem I laid out earlier, that you can't clean, if you've got a dirty truck coming through the door, that's somebody else's truck. That's not your truck. So they may be in a position to really not do much about it. The other point is that warehouses that do take in a lot of material, that do have their own fleets, like a FedEx, like a UPS, they're going to be able to clean up their fleet a lot easier than, let's say, just an independent warehouse owner. This actually came to my attention through a conversation with somebody from Prologis, which is the big warehouse operator out there. So they don't have that kind of giant fleet like a FedEx or UPS facility, or maybe an Amazon would have. So there's kind of a dichotomy there.
Well, John, the other thing I have to ask about is when we're seeing some of these regulations go into effect in California, sometimes it trickles into other states. Do you think other regions are watching to see what happens or how this plays out and kind of act accordingly?
I do. I mean, California gets beat around the head and neck for what they do, but well, quite frankly, what a lot of what they do becomes the benchmark or the leading edge for what other states do. So yes, I do think that I mean, this, quite frankly, this isn't that radical a move. It's an attempt to clean up a fleet through use of electric vehicles or natural gas vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, and those kind of programs are in existence all over the country. Maybe not in every state, but in a lot of states.
And so, John, let's move on a little bit to our next topic here. We were talking about how you did a bit of a follow up on Colonial Pipeline on your podcast, Drilling Deep. And you kind of talked about how Justin King from Comdata was finding this data that was talking about truckers filling up and topping off their tanks, maybe not with an exact need during that happened. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys talked about on your podcast?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because we talked here about, not just we talked here, but really the whole national media 2 weeks ago, or has it been 2 weeks now or 3 weeks? I can't remember, but was talking about how so many motorists ran out, filled their tanks. And the question was, is that panic buying or is that rational behavior? To me, it was rational behavior. The question was always whether this was going to happen to trucks. It's not as easy on that. You're talking about big rigs. You're talking about taking time away from the road. But what Justin King of Comdata found was that the average purchase, Comdata does a lot of payment cards. So they found that the average purchase measured in gallons was dropping during that week. And what that tells you is that trucks were probably going to fill up, to top their tank, to fill up your, however you want to describe it, because they were concerned in the same way that motorists were concerned. They were concerned about there not being supplies. So I felt this to be confirmation of the fact that truck drivers acted very similar to motorists, maybe not exactly, but they said, "Look, I don't want my fuel gauge to get down to the level where it normally gets. So let's go get a little fuel that maybe we might not need here." And quite frankly, when Justin King described the data that he looked at, I think it confirms that.
So, John, we're talking about rational behavior versus irrational behavior. And so what we've seen, one of the things that we were talking about last week is maybe this is like incentive for other cyber attacks. We just spoke about Nate Tabak's report on maybe other industries or really industries throughout the country should be on alert. Do you think this is something that's going to be really kind of impacted or really kind of encouraging for more cyber attacks, especially within trucking?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that we know about this ransom payment is because of the unique nature of the colonial shutdown, which really affected so many people. So everybody wanted an interview, and they decided to tell. I know I spoke last week about the coverage we did about the cyber attack on Forward Air. They would not say whether they paid ransom or not, but you really got the strong sense that they did. One thing I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. In our coverage of Forward Air, I also interviewed the CIO of the company, whose name escapes me now, and he had been with UPS when it got hit with a nasty cyber attack several years ago. And what he said was when Forward Air hired him, the fact that he'd been there when there was a cyber attack was not viewed as a negative mark on his record. It wasn't like, oh, you were there and they got hit with a cyber attack, so you screwed up and we're going to hire somebody else. He said that Forward Air, and I think I would not surprise me this happens with everybody. Forward Air liked the fact that he'd been through the fire, that he'd been that, and he probably learned a lot from it. So I think again, I go back to what I said last week. Company after company after company is getting hit by these things. It's no shame in it. Forward Air did a full drill on it about 2 weeks before they actually got hit. And the CEO said he got a lot of calls from companies saying, "Hey, I hope you bundle on through. I hope you make it through this." And we got hit ourselves. So uh, I'm not. I don't want to say eventually everybody's going to get hit, but the universe of people that got hit is very, very large. Public companies like a Forward Air have to disclose it. Public companies, not public companies, but companies with a very public profile, like a Colonial, they obviously have to disclose it. What you don't see are the smaller companies that get hit.
John, thank you so much for your insights and joining us here today. We'll be sure to check in with you a little bit later on in the week.